"Excuse me, sir, my mom has a ring just like yours." The deep voice of a billionaire usually commands a room. But tonight, Richard Calloway is speechless. He looks down at the little girl standing before him. She couldn't be more than 7 or 8 years old, her blonde curls framing a face far too familiar. But it's her eyes, piercing blue, filled with a mixture of innocence and certainty, that send a cold chill down his spine. He grips the heavy gold ring on his finger, his family's crest etched into it, a one-of-a-kind heirloom passed down for generations. The only other person who ever had one was. No. That's impossible. His fingers tremble slightly as he kneels to meet the girl's gaze. "What did you say?" His voice is softer now, careful. The little girl lifts her tiny hand, pointing at the ring he's worn for decades. "My mom has one just like that," she says again, her voice steady, as if it's just a casual observation. She never takes it off. A powerful unease grips Calloway's chest. This ring is unique, there shouldn't be another. Not unless. He swallows hard. "Who's your mother?" The girl smiles brightly. "Evelyn." The name slams into him like a freight train. Evelyn. The one woman he had ever truly loved. The woman who disappeared without a trace nearly 8 years ago. His world tilts. Memories flood his mind, late nights filled with laughter, whispered promises, the way she fit perfectly in his arms. The night she vanished still haunts him. No note, no explanation. Just gone. He searched for her for years, hiring investigators, chasing shadows, but she was nowhere to be found. Eventually, he was forced to move on, to bury his heartbreak beneath the weight of his empire. And yet, here stands a little girl with Evelyn's eyes, wearing an expression far too familiar. Calloway steadies himself. "Evelyn, your mother. Where is she?" The girl tilts her head, as if considering whether she should tell him. "She's at home. She doesn't like big parties." He exhales sharply. Evelyn is alive. After all these years, she's alive, and she has a daughter. His daughter? The thought shakes him to his core. Before he can ask another question, a woman appears beside the girl, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Her eyes, wary, guarded, meet his. Not Evelyn. Someone else. "Lily, honey," the woman says gently. "We should get going." But Calloway can't let her walk away. His voice is urgent now. "Wait. Where is she? Where is Evelyn?" The woman hesitates, then whispers something that makes his blood run cold. "She doesn't want to see you." The words hit harder than he expected. A decade of wealth, success, and power, yet the only thing that truly mattered was something he never saw coming. His past wasn't buried. It was standing right in front of him. And it had a face. A little girl's face. Richard Calloway stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The hum of laughter and clinking champagne glasses around him faded into the background. "She doesn't want to see you." The words rang in his ears, cutting deeper than he expected. For years, he had searched for Evelyn. Hired the best investigators. Followed dead-end leads. Wondered if she had run away, if she had betrayed him, or worse, if something had happened to her. And now, a child, her child, stood before him, claiming Evelyn was alive. A daughter. Could she be his? "Please," Calloway's voice was lower now, raw. "Tell me where she is." The woman hesitated, glancing down at Lily. "Come on, sweetie. We need to go." But Calloway wasn't going to let her slip away so easily. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. "Give this to her. Tell her I need to talk." The woman took it but said nothing. Instead, she gently nudged Lily away, disappearing into the crowd. For the first time in years, Calloway felt powerless. The past that haunts him. That night, Calloway sat in his penthouse office, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. But his mind was elsewhere, on a woman with dark curls and a mischievous smile, a woman who had once made him believe love was worth more than power. Evelyn. He had met her before he was a billionaire, back when he was just an ambitious young man struggling to make a name for himself. She had been everything he wasn't, wild, free-spirited, and full of laughter. He had been drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Their love had been fast and intense. Late-night talks. Dreams of a future together. A promise that no matter how rich or powerful he became, he would always choose them. But one night, she disappeared. No warning. No note. Just gone. For years, he had convinced himself that she left because she wanted a different life. But now, with a little girl claiming Evelyn had a matching ring, his family's ring, new questions clawed at him. Had she left by choice? Or had something forced her to disappear? And most of all, had she been hiding his child from him? There was only one way to find out. Calloway picked up his phone and dialed the number of his most trusted private investigator. "Find her," he said. "Find Evelyn Carter. And find out why she never came back." A shocking discovery. The next morning, Calloway barely touched his coffee as his investigator, Jacob Reed, walked into his office. The man was efficient, discreet, and had never failed him before. "I ran the name Evelyn Carter," Reed said, setting down a folder. "She's living in a small town about 2 hours from here. Works at a bookstore. Lives modestly." Calloway's grip tightened. Evelyn had never cared for wealth, but this? She had been fiercely independent, always talking about seeing the world. But now she was in a quiet little town, far from the life they once dreamed of. "Does she have a daughter?" Calloway asked. Reed nodded. "Lily Carter. 7 years old." 7. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. 7 years ago, Evelyn disappeared. 7 years ago, she might have been pregnant, with his child. Calloway flipped through the file, his pulse quickening. But then something else caught his eye. A police report. He frowned. "What's this?" Reed hesitated. "That's where things get complicated. Evelyn didn't just disappear. It looks like she was running from something." Calloway's jaw tightened. "From what?" Reed exhaled slowly. "She filed a police report right before she left. Claimed someone was following her. Threatening her." Calloway's breath hitched. "Who?" Reed hesitated. At the time, she didn't name anyone. But a few months later, she was listed as a witness in an open case against Victor Langley. The name sent a wave of rage through Calloway's veins. Victor Langley. His former business rival. The man who had spent years trying to destroy him. And now, it seemed, he had destroyed something far more important than money. Calloway's fist clenched around the file. This wasn't just about finding Evelyn anymore. It was about finding out why she had to run, and what Victor Langley had done to her. Richard Calloway gripped the file in his hands, his mind spinning. Victor Langley. The name alone sent a surge of anger through him. Langley had always been ruthless, a man willing to cross any line for power. They had clashed many times in the business world, but Calloway never imagined Langley would have had anything to do with Evelyn's disappearance. But the police report told a different story. Evelyn had been in danger. And she had run, not because she wanted to leave, but because she had to. Calloway clenched his jaw. If Langley had threatened Evelyn, he would answer for it. But first, he had to find her. He reached for his phone and dialed the number on the investigator's report. The bookstore where Evelyn worked. It rang twice before a soft, familiar voice answered. Maplewood Books, how can I help you? Calloway's breath caught. Evelyn. For the first time in 7 years, he heard her voice again. Evelyn, he said quietly. Silence. Then a sharp inhale on the other end. Richard. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He could hear the fear in it. I need to see you. No, the answer was immediate. Please, just leave this alone. He gritted his teeth. You owe me an explanation. She let out a shaky breath. I don't owe you anything. Calloway's grip tightened on the phone. Then answer one question. Is Lily my daughter? Silence again. Too long. Then, softly, almost painfully, she said, Goodbye, Richard. And the line went dead. Face to face. Calloway didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and headed for his car. If Evelyn wouldn't come to him, he would go to her. The drive to the small town was a blur. His heart pounded with every mile, the weight of years pressing down on him. When he pulled up to Maplewood Books, the bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. The scent of old pages and fresh coffee filled the space. Behind the counter, arranging books on a shelf, was Evelyn. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, a few curls falling around her face. She looked almost the same, except for the shadows beneath her eyes, the guarded expression that hadn't been there before. When she turned and saw him, her entire body stiffened. Richard, she said, her voice laced with quiet panic. She glanced toward the back of the shop, as if making sure no one else was watching. You can't be here. Calloway took a step forward. Then why did Lily say what she did? Her breath hitched. Evelyn, he continued, his voice softer now, is she mine? Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. It doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't, he snapped. She has my mother's eyes. Evelyn looked away. You don't understand. Calloway's patience snapped. Then help me understand. 7 years, Evelyn. 7 years, and I thought you left because you wanted to. But that's not the truth, is it? Evelyn's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. I wanted to tell you, she whispered. I wanted to stay. Then why didn't you? His voice was filled with frustration, but beneath it, pain. Her lips parted, but she hesitated. Then, finally, the truth came out. Because Victor Langley threatened my life. The words hit Calloway like a sledgehammer. He took a step back. What? Evelyn's eyes were filled with anguish. I was pregnant, Richard. And I was happy. But then. I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. About Langley. About how he was laundering money and destroying companies, including yours. Calloway's fists clenched. I went to the police, she continued. I thought I was doing the right thing. But someone tipped him off. And one night, a man came to my apartment. He told me if I didn't disappear, if I ever spoke to you again, she swallowed hard. He would kill me. And our child. A sharp pain shot through Calloway's chest. Evelyn wiped at her tears. I didn't leave because I wanted to, Richard. I left because I had to. To protect Lily. To keep her safe. Calloway could barely breathe. The thought of Evelyn alone, scared, running for her life while carrying his child. And he had never known. Fury surged inside him. Not at her, but at Langley. That man had taken everything from him. But now, Calloway wasn't going to let him win. He met Evelyn's gaze, his voice steady. You don't have to run anymore. Evelyn let out a shaky laugh, but there was no humor in it. And what are you going to do, Richard? Walk into Langley's office and demand an apology? Calloway's eyes darkened. No, he said. I'm going to destroy him. Evelyn stared at Richard, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I'm going to destroy him. His words carried a weight that sent a shiver down her spine. You don't understand, she whispered. Langley isn't just some ruthless businessman. He has people everywhere. Connections. The kind that make people disappear. Calloway's jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? Evelyn let out a humorless laugh. Then you should also know that once he sees you digging, he'll come after you. I'm not afraid of him. Her eyes flashed. You should be. Calloway stepped closer. He threatened you. He took 7 years from me. From our daughter. If you think I'm going to stand by and let that slide, you don't know me as well as you used to. Evelyn turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. I don't need a knight in shining armor, Richard. I just need to keep Lily safe. Calloway exhaled sharply. He knew Evelyn was stubborn. But this wasn't about pride, it was about justice. And family. She's my daughter, he said quietly. You can't expect me to walk away. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the wood. I never wanted you to walk away. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I just wanted you to be safe. Calloway placed a hand on the counter, close to hers but not quite touching. I can protect myself. She turned to face him, her green eyes filled with fear, anger, and something else, regret. Then promise me you won't go after Langley. Richard hesitated. Evelyn sighed, stepping back. I knew it. You're just like before. Always running toward the fire instead of thinking things through. That's not fair, he said. I'm not doing this just for me. She shook her head. And what happens if you push too hard? If Langley finds out, you know? What if, she swallowed hard. What if he decides to finish what he started? Silence stretched between them. Finally, Calloway said, then I'll be ready. The past comes back. That night, Richard sat in his penthouse, staring at the skyline, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. 7 years. 7 years of believing Evelyn had abandoned him. 7 years of building his empire, trying to outrun a pain he never understood. And all this time, she had been out there, raising his daughter, hiding in fear. Langley had taken something from him. Something irreplaceable. A notification flashed on his phone. A message from his investigator, Jacob Reed. Found something. Langley's been making big moves lately. Call me. Richard wasted no time dialing. Reed picked up on the first ring. You're not gonna like this. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. What is it? Reed exhaled. Langley's been making quiet payments to a certain ex-cop. The same one who took Evelyn's police report 7 years ago. And get this, 3 months later, that cop retired early and moved overseas. Richard's blood ran cold. You're saying Langley paid him off? I'm saying that Evelyn's case, her disappearance, was swept under the rug. And Langley made sure of it. Richard's chest burned with fury. That's not all, Reed continued. I traced one of his shell companies. Looks like he recently bought out a small-town property management firm. Calloway frowned. And? Reed hesitated. That firm owns the apartment building Evelyn's living in. Calloway shot to his feet. You're telling me Langley owns her home? Not just owns it, Reed said grimly. He bought it last month. A wave of realization crashed over Richard. Langley knew where Evelyn was. And if he knew, he was watching her. Nowhere left to run. Richard was already in his car before the call ended, speeding toward Evelyn's town. If Langley had been keeping tabs on her, then Evelyn and Lily were already in danger. When he reached her apartment, he barely took a second to knock before pushing the door open. Evelyn gasped, jumping from the couch where she had been reading to Lily. "Richard? What the?" He locked eyes with her. "Pack a bag. Now." Evelyn's face darkened. "Excuse me? There's no time." He turned to Lily, who was looking at him wide-eyed. His heart ached. He wanted to be softer, gentler, but there wasn't time. "What's happening?" Evelyn demanded. Richard exhaled, trying to steady himself. "Langley knows where you are. He bought this building." Evelyn's face turned pale. "No. No, that's not possible." Richard pulled out his phone and showed her the documents. "It is. And it means he's been watching you." Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, panic flashing in her eyes. Lily, sensing the fear in the room, reached for her mother's hand. "Mommy." Evelyn immediately knelt beside her daughter, forcing a smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's okay." But it wasn't. Richard could see the way her hands trembled. The way her breathing quickened. Evelyn turned back to him. "Where do we go?" Richard didn't hesitate. "My place. You'll be safe there." Evelyn hesitated. "I don't know if." "Evelyn." His voice was firm, unwavering. "You've spent 7 years running. 7 years looking over your shoulder." He softened. "Let me help you. Let me protect our daughter." Evelyn's breath hitched. For the first time, Richard saw something shift in her eyes. A realization. She wasn't alone anymore. She nodded. "Okay." Richard exhaled, relief washing over him. But as he led them outside to his car, a pair of watchful eyes followed them from across the street. And a phone call was made. "Yeah. They're leaving." A pause. "Yes, sir. I'll take care of it." The black sedan sat parked a few houses down from Evelyn's apartment, its tinted windows hiding the man inside. He watched as Richard Calloway ushered Evelyn and Lily into his sleek car. The billionaire's every move was calculated, protective. The man on the phone smirked. Calloway thought he was in control. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The escape begins. Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly, glancing in the rearview mirror at Evelyn and Lily. Evelyn was pale, clutching her daughter's hand as if afraid to let go. "We're safe now, right?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting through the tense silence. Richard forced a reassuring smile. "Yes, sweetheart. You're safe with me." Evelyn's eyes flickered toward him, but she said nothing. The highway stretched ahead of them, city lights glowing in the distance. They weren't far from Richard's penthouse, a fortress in the sky, equipped with private security and the latest surveillance systems. But as Richard switched lanes, his gut twisted. The same black sedan had been trailing them for miles. His instincts screamed. He tightened his grip on the wheel. "Evelyn, hold on to Lily." Evelyn sat up straighter. "What? What's wrong?" Richard didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the gas, his car surging forward. The black sedan sped up. Evelyn's eyes widened. "Richard." A cold, sinking feeling settled in his stomach. This wasn't just paranoia. They were being followed. A high-speed threat. Richard made a sharp turn onto a side street, hoping to lose them. The black sedan followed. His heart pounded. "Hold on," he said, his voice sharp. Evelyn clutched Lily close. "Richard, you're scaring her." "She should be scared," he snapped. "Whoever's in that car isn't here to welcome us home." The sedan accelerated, closing the gap. Richard's mind raced. He had dealt with hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, men who would do anything for power. But this was different. This was personal. He knew Langley's methods. He didn't send warnings, he sent problems that didn't leave loose ends. Richard couldn't let this end on the side of a road. His jaw clenched. He had one shot. Up ahead, a red light. An intersection. Cars crossing. Richard slammed the gas pedal. "Richard!" Evelyn screamed. The car shot forward, barely missing the oncoming traffic. Tires screeched, horns blared, chaos behind them. The sedan, caught off guard, hesitated for a split second, just long enough. Richard took a hard right onto another street. By the time the sedan reappeared in his rearview mirror, it was too late. They had lost them. For now. Nowhere feels safe. When they finally pulled into the underground garage of Richard's penthouse, Evelyn was still shaking. Lily clung to her mother's side, confused but trusting. Richard exhaled, turning to Evelyn. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer at first. Just looked at him, her face unreadable. Then, softly, she asked, "Is this what our life is going to be now?" Richard swallowed hard. "I won't let them hurt you," he promised. Evelyn shook her head. "This isn't about me. It's about Lily." The weight of her words settled deep. Lily. His daughter. Their daughter. Richard turned to the child, who was watching him with wide, innocent eyes. She didn't deserve this. None of them did. "I'll end this," he said. His voice was low, firm. "Langley won't touch either of you again." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Then, surprising him, she reached out, her fingers brushing over his. "Just, don't become like him," she whispered. Richard stilled. "I know what you're capable of," she continued. "I know how far you'll go when someone threatens what's yours." Her voice trembled. "Don't lose yourself in this." Richard's chest tightened. Years ago, she had loved him because he fought for what he believed in. But now, after everything, she feared he might go too far. He looked down at her hand on his. He would never become Langley. But he would destroy him. For Evelyn. For Lily. For everything Langley had stolen. The war begins. Richard's phone buzzed. A message from Jacob Reed. "Langley knows she's gone. He's making moves. Be ready." Richard's jaw tightened. This wasn't over. Langley had played his games in the shadows. But Richard Calloway wasn't hiding anymore. The war had just begun. Richard Calloway paced the floor of his penthouse, the weight of his decision pressing down on him with every step. He had built an empire on the back of his ambition and ruthless determination, but tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't a billionaire businessman. Tonight, he was a father, and he would stop at nothing to protect his daughter. Evelyn and Lily were safe, for now, locked behind the penthouse's reinforced walls. But the danger they faced wasn't something that could be hidden away forever. Langley was a shadow that lurked in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Richard had no intention of giving him that moment. Preparing for battle. Jacob Reed had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, compiling intel on Langley's movements. The man was careful, methodical, his connections running deep through the veins of the city. But Richard had an advantage. He wasn't just fighting for money or power anymore. He was fighting for his family, and that made him dangerous. Reed's latest report sat on Richard's desk, marked with urgent red. Langley was planning something big. Calloway sat down, flipping open the file. The report outlined Langley's recent activities, secret meetings, large sums of money moving between offshore accounts, and a growing network of mercenaries that seemed to follow his every order. It didn't take a genius to figure out what Langley was planning. He wasn't just after Evelyn. He wanted to wipe out anyone who stood in his way, starting with Richard. Richard stared at the screen, his fingers tapping the desk. It was clear that Langley had been biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. But Richard wasn't going to wait any longer. A talk with Evelyn. Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in, her eyes still filled with worry, but there was something else now, something he hadn't seen before. It was a look of determination. "I know you're making plans, Richard," she said quietly, her voice steady but strained. "But I need to know one thing." He met her gaze. "Anything. If you go after Langley," she started, her hands clenched tightly on the table, "what happens to us?" "To Lily?" Richard's heart tightened at the mention of his daughter's name. "You and Lily will be protected. Always." Evelyn's eyes softened for a brief moment before she shook her head. "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you're going to be the man I fell in love with, or if you're going to let this fight consume you." Richard exhaled sharply, frustration rising in his chest. "I'm doing this for you, for her." "I know," Evelyn whispered. "But I don't want to lose you. Not like this." There was a long silence between them, and in that silence, Richard understood. She wasn't afraid of Langley. She was afraid of losing him. And that terrified him more than anything Langley could do. A change in strategy. As the night wore on, Richard's resolve hardened. He could no longer afford to play the waiting game. Langley was relentless, but Richard had one advantage: he knew Langley's weakness. Langley had spent years building his empire, cutting down anyone who posed a threat to his control. But what Langley didn't realize was that his greatest strength, his network, was also his greatest weakness. The more people Langley involved, the more vulnerable he became. Richard knew he had to expose Langley, bring the empire crashing down from the inside. He couldn't go after him directly, at least, not yet. He had to make Langley trust him again. That meant taking a different approach, one that put everything on the line. The first move. Richard tapped a few keys on his phone, sending a text to Jacob Reed. "Set up a meeting with Langley. I'll play his game." Reed responded within seconds. "Are you sure about this? Langley's not someone you want to get close to." Richard's fingers hovered over the screen. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. This was dangerous. He was going to have to walk a fine line, pretending to be something he wasn't. But the alternative, waiting, hiding, doing nothing, wasn't an option. "We don't have a choice. We have to make him think we're on his side." As he hit send, Richard glanced at Evelyn, who had quietly entered the room. Her expression softened when she saw the determination on his face. "Be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his heart heavy. "I will. I promise." But even as the words left his lips, Richard knew that this game was far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. Langley was a man who played for keeps. And now, so was Richard Calloway. The cost of revenge. Richard spent the next few hours strategizing. He needed leverage, something to make Langley believe that he was no longer a threat, but an ally. There had to be something, some angle he could exploit. But as the hours stretched on, something gnawed at the back of his mind. What if it wasn't just Langley he had to worry about? Richard had built his empire through a mix of ambition, intelligence, and sheer force of will. But as the clock ticked down, he realized that Langley wasn't just fighting for control of the city, he was fighting for control of everything Richard had ever built. This wasn't just about Evelyn and Lily anymore. This was about taking back what was rightfully his. And the only way to do that was to go after Langley's empire. He had to break it from the inside. But to do that, he would have to risk everything. And that included Evelyn. Richard Calloway sat at the edge of his penthouse desk, his hands steepled in front of him. The city stretched out below, beautiful, cold, and indifferent to the storm he was about to unleash. The plan was in motion. But now, it was all about timing. He had spent the last several days planting the seeds. A whisper here. A rumor there. Slowly, Richard began weaving his way into Langley's inner circle, his face reappearing at every high-profile event, every private gathering. To Langley, Richard Calloway was now a potential ally, a businessman willing to help him achieve even more power. But Richard's game wasn't about power. It was about survival. Langley had taken too much from him. And it was time for Richard to take it all back. The meeting. The day of the meeting arrived, an exclusive, high-stakes negotiation that could change everything. Richard had made sure Langley knew that he had something to offer, something worth more than money. Something Langley needed. When Richard entered the luxurious boardroom, Langley was already there, seated at the head of the table. His icy blue eyes locked onto Richard's as he stood, tall and imposing. "Calloway," Langley said, his voice smooth. "I must admit, I wasn't expecting to see you here." Richard smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm full of surprises, Langley." The tension between them was palpable, two men, both with something to prove. One had everything, the other had nothing left to lose. Langley leaned forward, his hands pressed together in front of him. "What's your angle, Richard? You've been circling me for weeks. I know you're not here to play nice." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're right. I'm not here to play." He slid a manila folder across the table. Langley's gaze flicked to it before returning to Richard. "You think you can buy me out with information?" Langley's smirk was smug, but Richard knew better. Langley had always thought he was invincible, that no one could touch him. But today, Richard was going to prove him wrong. Langley flipped open the folder, his expression faltering as he scanned the contents. Inside were the names of several key players, high-ranking officials, police officers, and businessmen, all tied to Langley's criminal empire. These were people Langley had been paying off, manipulating to keep his operations running smoothly. But now, it was all in the open. The evidence was damning. "Where did you get this?" Langley's voice was strained, no longer confident. Richard smiled again, this time with real satisfaction. "You've been sloppy, Langley. Your empire's built on fear, but fear doesn't last forever." For a moment, Langley said nothing, his eyes scanning the documents. Then, with a sharp, predatory grin, he closed the folder and pushed it aside. "Nice try, Richard," Langley said coldly. "But you're making a big mistake." Richard's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had already gone too far to back down. "I'm not the one making a mistake, Langley," Richard said, his voice low but steady. "I'm giving you a choice." Langley raised an eyebrow. "A choice? Take the fall. Step down. Let your empire crumble. And maybe I'll spare you." Richard's voice was like ice, calculated. Langley stood slowly, his posture predatory. "Or what?" Richard leaned forward. "Or I go public. I make sure everyone knows who you really are. I bring down everything you've built. Every single person you've ever paid off. And I'll make sure you go down with it." For the first time, Richard saw a flicker of fear in Langley's eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. Richard knew he had struck a nerve. Langley's smirk faded as he glared at Richard. "You think you can take me down?" he asked, his voice low. "You're not the man you used to be. You've made a deal with the devil." Richard's eyes never left Langley's. "No, Langley. I made a deal with myself. And now, I'm going to make sure you pay for everything you've done. The price of victory." The meeting ended in a stalemate. Langley wasn't ready to back down yet, but Richard had planted the seed. He could feel it, the first crack in Langley's armor. As Richard walked out of the boardroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The confrontation had been inevitable, but the true battle would take place in the shadows. Langley wouldn't give up easily. He would fight back with everything he had. But Richard wasn't afraid anymore. The final card. The next day, Richard received an unexpected phone call. It was from Jacob Reed, his trusted investigator. "Calloway," Reed said urgently, "I found something. Langley's planning a move. He's not just going to walk away." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "What's he planning?" Reed's voice dropped lower. "Langley's preparing to eliminate everyone who's ever crossed him. And that includes you. He's coming after your family next." Richard's blood ran cold. He had known Langley would retaliate, but he hadn't expected him to go this far. "What do I do?" Richard asked, his voice tight with urgency. Reed paused for a moment. "You need to act fast, Richard. Langley's already set his plans in motion. The only way to stop him is to take everything from him, before he does the same to you." The news hit Richard like a freight train. Langley wasn't just planning a counterattack, he was already making moves, pulling the strings behind the scenes. Richard had barely had time to process the warning when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was an alert from his security system, an intruder. His heart raced. He turned to Evelyn, who had been sitting quietly at the dining table, looking out over the city. She turned toward him, her eyes wide with concern. "Richard," she asked softly. "Get Lily. Now," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. Evelyn froze for a moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. Then, without hesitation, she moved quickly, rushing toward their daughter's room. Richard's mind spun. Langley had underestimated him, thinking he could control the narrative. But now, Richard wasn't just protecting his empire, he was protecting the family he hadn't known he had until recently. Every plan, every move Richard had made over the past few days, was leading to this moment. He couldn't let Langley win. Not when he finally had everything that mattered. The chase begins. Richard rushed to the nearest window, looking out over the streets below. He saw the sleek black sedan parked at the corner of his building, a car he recognized all too well. Langley's men had already arrived. They had a team. They had a plan. But so did Richard. He quickly dialed Jacob Reed again. "I need you to get Evelyn and Lily out of here. Now. I'll hold them off." "Richard, that's insane. They'll just do it," he snapped. "They'll be safe once they're away from here. You know the backup route. Get them out of the city. I'll handle Langley." He didn't wait for a response. Richard grabbed the keys to his car and rushed down the elevator. He knew Langley's men would be inside the building soon, but he couldn't afford to wait. Every second counted. By the time Richard reached the parking garage, he could see Langley's men moving toward the building's entrance. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. He knew what had to be done. A father's final stand. The car roared to life as Richard sped out of the garage, his instincts kicking into overdrive. He could feel Langley's men on his tail, the headlights of their sedan glowing in his rearview mirror. He could almost hear Langley's mocking laughter echoing in his head. This wasn't just about revenge. This wasn't even about power. This was about family. Richard weaved through traffic, his hands steady on the wheel. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was trying to buy time for Evelyn and Lily. He made a sharp turn, heading toward a less populated part of the city. His goal wasn't to outrun them, he needed to make them believe he was cornered. And that's when he saw the perfect opportunity. In his rearview mirror, Richard saw Langley's men closing in. They were almost on top of him, ready to force him off the road. But Richard had a different plan. With one last glance at the road ahead, Richard swerved the car hard to the right, taking them both onto a narrow side street, a dead end. The sound of the tires screeching as they slid into place echoed in the silence. For a moment, everything stood still. The black sedan rolled to a stop behind him, the men inside reaching for their weapons. Richard knew what was coming. He didn't have much time. The final move. Richard stepped out of his car, his face calm but his fists clenched. He heard Langley's men approach, footsteps echoing in the alley. "I'm giving you one chance, Calloway," one of them sneered, gun aimed at his chest. "Step aside, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Richard didn't flinch. He'd fought too long, too hard to lose everything now. He looked directly into the man's eyes. "Langley's done," Richard said, his voice low and unwavering. The man's eyes narrowed. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Richard smiled. "I don't need to win. I just need to make sure you lose." In the blink of an eye, the tension in the air snapped. Richard's phone buzzed. It was a message from Jacob Reed. "Evelyn and Lily are safe. We got them out." The men in front of Richard froze for just a moment, their focus shifting. That was all Richard needed. Before they could react, Richard made his move. With precision, he knocked the gun from the man's hand and used his elbow to knock the other out cold. In seconds, he was on the phone with the police, sending the evidence to the right people. Langley's empire would crumble the moment the authorities saw the truth. Reunion. When Richard finally returned to his penthouse, Evelyn and Lily were waiting for him. Evelyn's eyes were red, but there was relief in her expression. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief and gratitude. Richard nodded, his heart swelling. "They're not coming after us anymore." He turned to Lily, who was still clutching her mother's side. "You're safe, sweetheart. You're both safe." Lily smiled softly, a sense of calm finally settling over her. "I knew you'd protect us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's chest tightened. He had always known his worth in business, in wealth, in power. But it was moments like this, the quiet ones, that reminded him what mattered most. Evelyn stepped forward, her arms wrapping around him. "Thank you. For everything." He held her close, his resolve firm. "We're a family now, Evelyn. And I'll do whatever it takes to keep us together." The storm had passed. Richard Calloway stood at the window of his penthouse, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The past few days had been a whirlwind of danger, deception, and betrayal. But now, in the quiet moments that followed the chaos, he finally felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He had done it. He had fought the battle, faced his demons, and protected the ones he loved. But in the process, he had learned something more important than victory. The real battle. When Richard had first set out on this path, he had been driven by one thing: revenge. He had built his life around power, success, and ambition. For years, he had let those things define him. He thought that conquering his enemies, taking down those who threatened him, was the ultimate goal. But the truth was far simpler, and far more profound. The real battle, Richard realized, had never been about business, money, or even Langley's empire. It had always been about something deeper. It had been about his family. He had spent so many years chasing the wrong things, thinking they were the key to happiness. The drive for success had consumed him, blinded him to the things that truly mattered. But now, as he stood in this moment of peace, he understood. It wasn't about what you had, or how much you could control. It was about who you loved, who you protected, and who you let into your heart. A new beginning. Evelyn and Lily had been through so much. The fear, the loss, the uncertainty, they had lived with it for years. And now, Richard was finally able to give them the peace they deserved. He walked over to the small kitchen where Evelyn was sitting with a cup of coffee, her eyes soft with gratitude. Lily, perched on the counter, smiled up at him as he entered the room. "You're up early," Evelyn said with a gentle smile, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. Richard nodded, sitting beside her. "Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about." She raised an eyebrow. "And what's on your mind?" Richard leaned back, his hands clasped together in front of him. "Everything I thought I knew. Everything I thought mattered. It's all changed." Evelyn's expression softened, understanding in her eyes. "You've been through a lot, Richard. But we're here now. And we're safe." "I know," he said quietly. "But it's more than that. I've spent my whole life trying to be something. Someone powerful. Someone important. But now I see," he paused, taking a deep breath. "What really matters is you. And Lily. And making sure we have a future together. That's what I should have been fighting for all along." Lily, who had been listening intently, hopped down from the counter and wrapped her arms around his neck. "We're a family now, right, Daddy?" Richard smiled, the weight of everything he had done lifting from his chest. "Yes, sweetheart. We're a family. And nothing's going to change that. The power of love and family." As the day went on, Richard spent time with Evelyn and Lily, reflecting on how far they had come. The battle with Langley was over, but the true victory wasn't in the fight, it was in the moments that came afterward. Richard had lost so much time, years spent chasing an elusive idea of success. But now, in the presence of the people he loved, he realized that the richest part of life was not in the triumphs or the wealth, it was in the connections we make, the love we give, and the protection we offer those who matter most. The city outside still bustled with energy, a reminder of the world he had once ruled with an iron fist. But for the first time in his life, Richard understood that his true strength came from the people beside him, not the empire he had built. A new chapter. As evening fell and the lights of the city flickered on, Richard stood with Evelyn by the window, looking out over the horizon. It felt like the beginning of something new, a fresh start for their family. Evelyn turned to him, her hand gently brushing his. "What now?" she asked softly. Richard smiled, his heart lighter than it had ever been. "Now, we build a future. Together." He knew there would be challenges ahead, life was never without its hurdles. But with Evelyn and Lily by his side, he finally understood the power of love, of family, and of choosing what truly mattered. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. The life lesson. Richard Calloway's life had been a roller coaster of highs and lows, but it was in the quiet moments that he found his greatest strength. The lesson was clear: success could never replace the value of love and family. No matter how much wealth or power one accumulated, without the people you cherished, it all felt empty. He had learned the hard way that the fight for power was nothing compared to the fight for those you love. And now, he knew that his greatest victory wasn't in defeating Langley, it was in realizing that the people who mattered were the ones standing beside him. In the end, family was the most powerful thing Richard Calloway could ever have. And he would protect it with everything he had.